Well, I believe, and I think there are a lot of you in the room that are on the same page with this, that the current system doesn't work for the majority of people. It's designed to meet the needs of the majority of people, and actually it's failing most people, but it's failing the most vulnerable in the worst way imaginable. And I think that we need to turn things on its head. I think we need to look at how can we make the system work for the most vulnerable, and by doing so, we'll make things better for everyone. So that's kind of my perspective in doing this. Now, focusing on a whole population is a bit abstract. It is Friday, it's been a long week, and so I'd like to introduce my lovely co-trainer, the beautiful Sophia. So she's here just to bring this is Sophia getting, picture up here is her getting her Members Member of the Year 2 years ago. She was our inaugural Members Member of the Year. And looking at the two of us together, you think we're fairly similar. Sophie's an Evertonian, I'm not, so that's a big difference. But because she has a learning disability, not because she's an Evertonian, because she has a learning disability, Soph's life expectancy is 27 years less than mine. 27 years. Can you remember what you were doing 27 years ago? November 1992, if my maths are correct. That's a very long time ago. That was the Queen's Annus Horribilis, the Windsor Castle fire, things like that. So it's a really long period of time. The good news is that it's come down from 29 years a couple of years ago, but still, I think you'll agree it's a pretty shocking stat. And when you see it represented as a person, it's even more heartbreaking still. So people with a learning disability are 58 times more likely to die before the age of 50, and they're 4 times more likely to die from a completely preventable cause. So that's what we need to address. So Soph, I'll hand over to you, because you are used to delivering these slides more than I am.
Mencap Liverpool Sefton, we're a small local charity but affiliated to, but we're not independent of the national charity Mencap. We focus on meeting the needs of adults with mild to moderate learning disability. We provide outreach, befriending, social and physical activity groups, workshops, travel training, volunteering, LD awareness training and easy read checking.
We're a grassroots organisation. We're not a service provider, we're not funded by the local authority. Our funding comes from major grants, so our biggest source of funding at the moment is the Help Through Crisis programme that the National Lottery, it's a National Lottery Community Fund grant, and we deliver that in partnership with St Andrew's Network and Raise. And I think the fact that our biggest source of funding is to help people in crisis possibly demonstrates something about how current austerity and welfare reform is having an impact on people with a learning disability.
Who do we work with? We work with adults 18 plus who have a learning disability, who live in either Sefton or Liverpool, who would benefit from our activities, and if you know anyone who applies for any of them, can please make a referral.
Definitely. They don't need a diagnosis of learning disability, and if you come across anybody who ticks those boxes who you think might need our help, then please make a referral to us. Anybody can refer. There's links on our website and you've all got contact details on the table. So that's the answer break over.
What is a learning disability? Mencap define a learning disability as a reduced intellectual ability and difficulty with everyday activities, for example, household tasks, socialising, or managing money which affects someone for their whole life, which just isn't right.
So why do we think you guys need to know more about learning disability? Well, 70% of people with a learning disability live without support from social services. So, Soph, do you have a support worker? No? So that's about 7,000 people in Liverpool who have a learning disability who don't have any formal support. And this group, as you might expect, are disproportionately more likely to get into difficulties. So being able to identify that a person might have a learning disability, we believe that makes you more effective in helping them. And that's why we run learning disability awareness training and easy rechecking and things like that. So yeah, please talk. I did say the ad break was over, it's not. So how can you tell if somebody might have a learning disability? What? Can't necessarily tell, Emma, yeah? So don't assume that the person will tell you, or that it will be visible. I don't introduce myself automatically and tell you everything about me, although I am quite an open person. But lots of people with a learning disability don't necessarily want to mention that to somebody until they've established whether or not they can trust that individual, or might just not think to say it unless they're asked. So we've put together just a few prompts to give you an idea, and just to maybe start you thinking that, hang on, I think that this person might have some extra support needs. And we'll whiz through them fairly quickly because I want to get on to the food poverty bit. And you'll look at some of these and think, oh, well, that applies to lots of people. There are lots of reasons why that might occur. And yeah, poverty does have a very noticeable short-term cognitive impact, which thankfully is generally reversible. So there are lots of reasons why somebody might have issues with telling the time, might either be late or very early for appointments, have difficulty relating things in the proper sequence, might struggle to grasp the concept of how long ago or recently something happened. So those kind of issues with time are all a good suggestion. And then words, think verbal or written things. So can't necessarily answer questions appropriately. So might acquiesce, so they might nod or agree with what you're saying. They will follow your non-verbal cues. Yeah? It's a very good example, isn't it? And they will repeat the bits of the sentence that you put emphasis on. So you feel like you've been understood, but actually that's not necessarily the case. So asking the question in a different way is a very important way of kind of checking understanding. Lots of people with a learning disability can read and can have some basic literacy. Lots of people don't, but some people do. But just because you can recognise what the words are on the page doesn't mean that you understand the implications of what they're saying. And that is an absolute killer when it comes to benefit letters. Ideas and eye contact, so difficulty in grasping abstract ideas or relationships. Again, that's something that really trips people up in benefit assessments when they're asked, what would you do if such and such happened? Well, that's a hypothetical question, and lots of people with a learning disability find hypothetical ideas quite difficult to get their head around. So again, they'd be more likely to acquiesce. Yeah? So, food poverty then. So, do you want to take a seat for this, take some weight off, just while I go through this? So, I found this definition. It's from the Bristol Food Poverty Council. And I like this definition because it's quite holistic. Having said that, the paper I've taken it from talks about groups who are most at risk of food poverty, and it doesn't include people with a learning disability, so I find that quite a glaring omission, but hopefully they'll see this video and put that right. So Food poverty, the inability to afford or to have access to food to make up a healthy diet. So we quite often think of it, I suppose, in ways similar to this first image, this kind of begging bowl, somebody starving, basic provisions. But those of us who kind of do more work, especially around food banks, know that it's about the quality of food as well as the quantity. So it's not just about hunger, but it's also about being appropriately nourished. It's about having the food that you need to, have a healthy diet and have a healthy life. Why is this important for people with a learning disability? What impact does it have? Well, people with a learning disability have a much higher risk of coronary heart disease, and the number one way to prevent coronary heart disease is diet. There are higher mortality rates from cancer. Bowel cancer is much more prevalent among the LD population. And there's problems in screening and late diagnosis. There's a much higher prevalence of long-term conditions, especially things like type 2 diabetes, mental health concerns. And people with a learning disability are much more likely to be overweight or underweight. So if you're a woman with a learning disability, then you've got 1 in 3 chance of being obese, compared to 1 in 5 for the general population. 20% of men with a learning disability will be underweight, compared to just 2% of the general population. And we know that being obese doesn't necessarily mean that you're not in food poverty. In fact, it can be a very glaring signal that in fact you are. So, some causes then. Again, this comes from the Bristol Food Council. Causes of food poverty are complex and multiple and include the following factors. So, every good talk should have 3 main points. So these are my 3 main points. They're financial, social and physical. So looking at financial, well, Nayan gave some really good examples about the impacts of austerity and welfare reform. So austerity, cuts to local services, cuts to social services, adult health and social care, cuts to the voluntary sector mean that there is much less support available. If you don't have a support worker, if you don't have access to anybody who can help you fill out those forms, read those letters, understand what's going on, then really things are hanging by a thread. There are many, many reasons why people's benefits get stopped. Universal credit hasn't started, thankfully, having a major impact on our members yet, because most people haven't started being migrated. But we're looking at obviously IT issues. Lots of people can't use a computer, don't have an email address, don't have access to the internet, don't have access to a computer, wouldn't necessarily understand or be able to navigate the system if they did. So that's a massive issue. Can't navigate helplines, can't cope with speaking to somebody on the phone, maybe don't have a phone that they can call on even. Transport, not being able to get to assessments. So you've got to go for your work capability assessment, but actually it's in a building, you've got no idea where it is, you don't know how to get there, you don't have any money for a taxi, and there's no one to help you, so you don't go to your assessment and then your benefits get stopped. You may not even understand the letter when it comes through the door, or your mental health may already be so compromised that you simply can't cope with opening the letter or engaging with the process. Or it may be that in the past somebody has helped you set up your benefits and your rent payments and your standing orders and everything like that, and then has instructed you, strictly, don't do anything about that. Just leave that all to me. I'll deal with that. And then maybe that person, for whatever reason, disappears, they move on to another role, or they move away, and then you're leaving letters piling up thinking, oh, I'm not allowed to deal with those, I don't know how to deal with them. So just not opening and dealing with the letters and understanding the implication of them is a really, really big issue. So this is a huge area of work for us. And does anybody in the room know of anybody whose mental health has been improved as a result of going through a PIP assessment? Anybody? No, didn't think so. I mean, we find that people, even members who have a reasonably good baseline level of mental health, when that PIP letter comes through the door, all of a sudden things start unravelling and going wrong, and just the stress of knowing you have to go through this process, even if you're somebody who's got fantastic support, like, you know, Soph's mum is a great advocate for her and knows, you know, she can go up to the CAB and, you know, she will take time off work to go and do that. But even if, you know, you have all of that in place, it's still a stressful process, isn't it? It's not a nice thing to go with. And so a big area of our work is supporting people through that mental health challenge. So this is a story from the front of the latest LEADER annual report. So LEADER is the Learning Disability Mortality Review, looking at the causes behind the mortality of people with a learning disability. So Taylor was a very sociable person who attended an art group at the day centre, so he was one of the lucky people who still had some social care. A year before his death, Taylor had an assessment for universal credit and was taken off his benefits. He didn't understand the impact and he ran out of money. His sister believes that he spent the last 6 months of his life worrying about his financial situation and felt that he was very anxious and troubled by this. Taylor died aged 59 from a bowel obstruction. And I think that's a pretty shocking story of the impacts that this can have. So moving on to some of the social causes, then this is where it gets a bit broader than just looking at the relative amount of money you have. Because for people with a learning disability, the lack of skills and food education is a massive barrier to maintaining a healthy diet. Most of our members, and they will tell you I am a bit of a healthy food fanatic, yeah. How many times a week do I nag you about salad, so? Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah. So, but people don't understand what's protein, what's carbohydrate, why they need to eat vegetables, why I'm nagging them about eating salad and fruit instead of chocolate and crisps. And just not having that knowledge and not having that understanding of how to prepare basic, affordable, healthy meals is a massive, massive gap. Support workers, now I absolutely don't want to do any support worker bashing because they do a very important job, but in the main they are paid the minimum wage, and we have a lot of support workers who are in working poverty. And who themselves are living a hand-to-mouth existence, doing what they can do to survive. And when you're in that situation and you're told by your management that you have to uphold people's rights to choose, then when you're in the supermarket with them and they're filling 2-litre bottles of full-fat Coke, multi-packs of chocolate bars, crisps, and there's no vegetables, there's nothing of any real nutritional value in their food shopping for the week, then you challenging them on that and helping them see the implications of what might happen if they only eat that for the week. Chippy's round the corner and you're hungry, then what are you going to spend that £2 on? You know, you're going to get a chippy, you're going to have a portion of chips, aren't you? And that's, you know, that's a reasonable decision, actually, for a lot of people to make. You know, you might not have any, you know, if you don't have any food in the cupboard, if you don't have any gas, you know, you don't have any money in the gas meter to cook some pasta on the hob, then actually you're making a logical decision, and we end up with people in this kind of short-term survival mode. We also find that people with a learning disability are much more susceptible to the impact of marketing and kind of you know, unhealthy marketing, and the cultural norms and the pressure to normalise and to be the same as you know, and do the same and eat the same as what the people around them are doing. So when you have a physical environment where within 5 minutes walk of you there are 10 different chippies and takeaway venues, but yet you'd have to get on a bus or have a long walk to go to a supermarket, then again, what are you going to choose? You're going to, you know, buy a pot noodle from the corner shop rather than go to the Asda in the pouring rain and carry back loads of bags of, you know, heavy shopping. Hate crime, unfortunately, is another issue that impacts our members and makes them less likely to want to kind of travel out of the environment in which they feel safe. Not having the cooking facilities. I mean, if you're giving people a food bank parcel with tinned goods, you know, can they open them? You know, we know that a lot of the food that gets, a lot of the tins that get donated to food banks aren't the posh ones with the pull rings, and you need the manual dexterity to do them anyway. But, you know, have you got a tin opener, and have you got the manual dexterity to open a tin of beans, even if you are going to eat them cold? We've been out with a food bank voucher and an emergency kind of food parcel to a family this week, and Mum didn't actually know how to turn the oven on. And when we got there, there wasn't a single item of food in any of the cupboards or in the fridge. The only thing that was there was 20 cans of full-fat Pepsi and a couple of bottles of wine. And yeah, you can probably hear how much that's affected me. The family didn't have any money to buy any food. This was Monday, we went out to them, and their next benefit payment was Thursday. So, yeah. So, furthering equality. What role does nutrition play in furthering equality for people with a learning disability? Well, I passionately believe in quality of life, not just quantity of life. People with a mild learning disability are actually more likely to suffer from more long-term health conditions than those with people with, you know, with more severe forms of learning disability. So these are arguably things, long-term conditions that arise from living in poverty. And food poverty also affects cognitive development. So if you're within pregnancy, early development, and also in adolescence, the food you eat has a big impact on the higher functions of cognitive development within the brain. And so it can really exacerbate the impact of somebody's learning disability. I believe that everybody should have the resources they need to thrive and not just survive. So that's why I believe that food is really important. So, what can we do? Now, I know I've just presented a lot of issues without giving any solutions, and I don't want to make out that I know all the answers, or that Mencap Liverpool Sefton know all the answers. And just like many of the people we work with, many of you, we're guilty of this short-term survival mode, with, you know, where we've spent all morning on the phone to Scottish Power, and then we've suddenly not got the time to do the bigger piece of work to actually make the longer-term difference. So I know there's a lot more that we could be doing as an organisation, and I'm really interested to hear what suggestions that you have. And Soph, is there anything that you want to say?
I think people shouldn't be going to food banks, because I think that's just wrong, plain wrong, for start. And
Why do you want to live an extra 27 years?
I want to live an extra 27 years because I want to see Everton win a trophy or something. And we go to Ballymore as well.
Thank you very much. So I'll hand over to Kev now to facilitate our table discussions.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys. Thank you, Sophia.